The Porsche Cayenne kicked up dust clouds as it rolled down the cracked asphalt road toward Millbrook County. Behind the wheel, Marcus Whitfield adjusted his designer sunglasses and smirked at the familiar landscape that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. The same weathered barns, the same rolling hills, the same God-forsaken stretch of nowhere that had once made him feel suffocated and small. But Marcus wasn't small anymore. The tailored Italian suit, the Swiss watch, the car that cost more than most people's houses, these were the trophies of a man who had conquered Silicon Valley and emerged victorious. He was returning to collect what he believed was rightfully his, the satisfaction of seeing Eleanor Carrington exactly where he'd left her, struggling with that pathetic excuse for a farm, probably desperate enough now to come crawling back. What Marcus didn't know was that the woman waiting for him had become something entirely different, something dangerous. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 15 years earlier, the Carrington farm stretched across 800 acres of prime Nebraska soil. But you wouldn't have known it from the mounting stack of overdue bills that cluttered Eleanor's kitchen table. At 23, she moved through the farmhouse with the weight of 3 generations pressing down on her shoulders. Her grandfather had built this place with nothing but determination and calloused hands. Her father had expanded it during the good years, adding the south pasture and the equipment barn that now stood half empty. Most of its machinery sold off piece by piece to keep the creditors at bay. The morning Marcus chose to abandon her started like any other. Elena was already dressed and heading to the stables before dawn, her work boots crunching through the frost-covered grass. The Holstein cattle needed milking, and the automated system had broken down again, another repair they couldn't afford. She'd learned to do it by hand, her fingers working efficiently while her mind calculated feed costs and veterinary bills. Marcus found her there, surrounded by the warm smell of hay and the rhythmic sound of milk hitting the pail. Even in work clothes, with her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, Elena possessed a natural grace that had first caught his attention during their college years at the University of Nebraska. But that morning, something was different in his expression. The easy smile that had charmed her throughout their 2-year relationship was replaced by something colder, more calculating. "We need to talk," he said, leaning against the stable door with his arms crossed. He was already dressed in his interview suit, navy blue, perfectly pressed, the one his mother had bought him for his upcoming job interviews in California. Elena straightened up, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Can it wait? I've got 40 head to get through before breakfast." "That's exactly what I want to talk about." Marcus stepped into the stable, but carefully, as if afraid the rural environment might contaminate his polished shoes. "This whole situation, Elena, this lifestyle." The word lifestyle came out like he was describing something distasteful, something beneath him. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October morning air. "What about it?" Marcus gestured broadly at their surroundings, the weathered wooden beams, the practical but unglamorous milking setup, the reality of agricultural life that required getting up before sunrise and working until after sunset. "Look around you. Really look. Your family's been struggling with this place for months. The bank notices, the equipment breaking down, the constant stress. Is this really what you want for the rest of your life?" Elena's hands stilled on the rope she'd been coiling. "This is my family's legacy, Marcus. 4 generations of Carringtons have worked this land, and where has that gotten them?" The question came out sharper than he'd probably intended, but Marcus didn't soften it. "Your parents left you with a mountain of debt and a property that's bleeding money. The smart thing would be to sell it, take whatever you can get and start fresh somewhere else. Start fresh where? Doing what? With me." Marcus moved closer, and for a moment, Elena thought she saw a glimpse of the man she'd fallen in love with. "I got the job, Elena. Senior software engineer at Technova Systems in Palo Alto. The salary is more than this farm has made in the last 3 years combined. We could have a real life out there. A modern life. Elena set down the rope and really looked at him. Marcus had been talking about California for months, ever since he'd graduated with his computer science degree. The opportunities, the innovation, the chance to be part of something bigger than the agricultural communities they'd grown up in. She'd always assumed that when he talked about we and us in relation to these dreams, he meant they'd figure out a way to make it work together. What about the farm? What about it? Marcus's voice carried a note of impatience. Sell it to one of the corporate agricultural companies. They're always looking to expand their holdings. You might not get top dollar, but it would be enough to clear the debts and give us a start in California. This isn't just property, Marcus. This is home. This is where I grew up, where my family is buried, where you'll be buried too if you stay, he interrupted. Financially, professionally, personally. Elena, be realistic. Small family farms are becoming extinct. You can't compete with industrial agriculture. You can't afford the technology upgrades, the automation, the scale needed to survive in today's market. You're fighting a losing battle. Eleanor walked to the stable window and looked out across the fields. The corn had been harvested weeks ago, leaving behind stubbled earth that would rest through the winter. In the distance, she could see the old oak tree where her grandfather had proposed to her grandmother in 1952. Beyond that, the creek where she'd learned to fish, where she'd brought Marcus on their first date 3 years ago. My great-grandfather cleared this land by hand, she said quietly. He built the original farmhouse with lumber he cut himself. My grandfather survived the Dust Bowl and the Depression. My father expanded the operation during the 80s. Even when everyone said small farms couldn't compete. And look where that optimism got him, Marcus said. Elena, I'm trying to save you from making the same mistakes. Sometimes you have to know when to cut your losses. She turned back to face him. Is that what I am to you? A loss you need to cut? The question hung between them like smoke in the morning air. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then ran a hand through his carefully styled hair. That's not what I meant. But it's what you said. Elena's voice remained steady, but something fundamental had shifted in her expression. You want me to abandon everything my family built, everything I've worked for, everything I believe in, because it's inconvenient for your career plans. I want you to be practical. I want us to have a future that isn't defined by struggle and failure and hanging on to something that's already dead. The farm isn't dead. Look at your bank statements, Elena. Look at your equipment. Look at your profit margins. This place is on life support, and you're too stubborn to admit it. Elena walked back to the milking stool and sat down, positioning herself next to the next cow in line. Her movements were deliberate, practiced, carrying a quiet dignity that seemed to frustrate Marcus further. So what are you saying exactly? She asked as she began working. I'm saying that I got offered the position, and I'm taking it. I'm leaving for California next week. The question is whether you're coming with me or staying here to go down with the ship. The rhythmic sound of milking continued, steady and sure. Elena didn't look up from her work when she spoke. That's not really a question, is it? You've already decided. You've made your choice, and now you're presenting me with an ultimatum disguised as an opportunity. It is an opportunity. The best one either of us is likely to get. For you, maybe. But what would I do in California? I don't have a degree in computer science. I don't know anything about technology or Silicon Valley or that world you want to be part of. I know farming. I know the land. I know how to coax life out of soil and how to care for animals and how to read weather patterns and soil conditions. You could learn other things. Why should I have to? The question stopped Marcus short. He'd been pacing back and forth across the stable floor, but now he stood still, looking at Elena with something that might have been confusion, because that's what people do when they grow up, Elena. They adapt. They move forward. They don't cling to the past because it's familiar and comfortable. Is that what you think I'm doing? Clinging to the past? Aren't you? Elena finished with the cow and moved to the next one, her motions smooth and efficient. I think I'm fighting for something worth preserving. I think I'm honoring the sacrifices my family made and refusing to let their work be meaningless. I think I'm choosing to believe that some things are more important than easy money and comfortable living. Some things like what? Like keeping your word. Like finishing what you start. Like not abandoning people who depend on you when things get difficult. The implication hung heavy between them. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his polished shoes scraping against the concrete floor. I'm not abandoning you. I'm asking you to come with me, on your terms, to your life. Doing what you want to do. That's how partnerships work, Elena. Sometimes one person has to make sacrifices for the good of both. And it just happens to be my turn to sacrifice? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus fell silent. In the distance, they could hear the sound of roosters crowing and the gentle lowing of cattle in the pasture. Normal farm sounds. The audio backdrop of Eleanor's entire life. The thing is, Eleanor continued, her voice remaining calm and measured, you don't actually want a partner. You want someone who'll validate your choices and make you feel good about abandoning everything we built together. You want me to tell you that you're right to leave, that the farm is hopeless, that I was foolish to think I could make this work. But I won't do that. Elena stood up and faced him directly, her dark eyes steady and clear. Because I don't think you're right. I think you're scared. I think you're taking the easy path and dressing it up as the smart path. And I think you know that if you could make this work, if we could make this work together, it would mean something. It would be an accomplishment that mattered. Making money matters too. Money that you earn by giving up on everything else. Money that comes from walking away when things get challenging. What does that accomplish except proving that you can quit successfully? Marcus's jaw tightened. I'm not quitting anything. I'm making a strategic career decision by leaving me behind, by recognizing reality and acting accordingly. Elena nodded slowly, as if his words had confirmed something she'd already suspected. Then I guess we want different things from life. I guess we do. They stood looking at each other across a distance that seemed to be growing wider by the moment. Everything they'd built together, every plan they'd made, every moment of intimacy and connection, all of it was dissolving in the space between them. So this is it? Elena asked. This is it? Marcus turned to leave, then stopped at the stable door. For what it's worth, Elena, I did love you. I do love you. But love isn't enough when the practical realities don't align. I know you believe that, Elena said. And maybe someday you'll be right. But I don't think today is that day. He left without another word, his footsteps echoing across the courtyard as he walked back to his car. Elena heard the engine start, heard the gravel crunch under his tires as he drove away. She stood in the stable doorway and watched until his taillights disappeared around the bend in the road. Then she went back to milking the cows, because that's what needed to be done. The silence that followed Marcus's departure wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sleeping farm. It was the hollow emptiness of abandonment, echoing through every room of the old farmhouse and settling into Eleanor's bones like winter cold. She gave herself exactly 24 hours to grieve, 24 hours to feel sorry for herself, to question every decision that had led to this moment, to wonder if Marcus had been right about her stubborn refusal to face reality. On the second morning, she walked out to the mailbox and found 3 more overdue notices: the feed supplier, the veterinary clinic, and the agricultural equipment loan. Numbers written in red ink that seemed to mock her determination. Elena stood there holding the envelopes, watching the sun rise over fields that had been in her family for 90 years, and made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to save the farm by doing what everyone else was doing. She was going to save it by doing what no one else had thought to try. The first step was brutal honesty. Elena spent the following week creating a complete financial inventory, documenting every asset, every debt, every stream of income, and every expense. The picture that emerged was worse than she'd admitted to Marcus, but it wasn't hopeless. The land itself was valuable. 800 acres of prime agricultural soil with excellent water rights and proximity to major transportation routes. The problem wasn't the foundation, it was the business model. Elena had grown up assuming that farming meant doing what her father and grandfather had done, raising cattle, growing corn and soybeans, following the seasonal rhythms that had sustained rural communities for generations. But those communities were disappearing precisely because they'd never adapted to changing markets, evolving consumer preferences, or technological innovations that could transform agricultural productivity. Marcus had been wrong about one thing. Elena wasn't afraid of change. She was afraid of the wrong kind of change, the kind that involved abandoning principles and communities and traditions that still had value. But change that strengthened those things, change that made them more viable and sustainable, that was exactly what she needed. The inspiration came from an unexpected source. Elena's neighbor, Dorothy Hutchinson, was an 80-year-old widow who lived alone on a small homestead about 2 miles down the road. Dorothy had been maintaining a massive vegetable garden and a small orchard for decades, mostly for her own consumption. But every summer, she set up a small roadside stand, selling surplus produce to locals and the occasional tourist passing through. Elena had been buying eggs from Dorothy since childhood, but she'd never paid attention to the economics of the operation until she stopped by one afternoon in late November and found Dorothy counting a substantial stack of cash. "Good day?" Elena asked, nodding toward the money. Dorothy looked up and smiled. "Good season. I cleared about $8,000 this year, just from the roadside stand. Not bad for an old woman growing vegetables in her backyard. $8,000. Elena did quick mental calculations. Dorothy was working maybe 2 acres of intensive cultivation, selling direct to consumers at premium prices rather than commodity wholesale rates. She was eliminating middlemen, avoiding transportation and storage costs, and capturing the full retail value of her products. "Dorothy," Elena said slowly, "would you be willing to teach me what you know about market gardening?" That winter became Eleanor's graduate education in sustainable agriculture. She read everything she could find about organic farming techniques, permaculture principles, crop rotation strategies, and direct-to-consumer marketing. She learned about community-supported agriculture programs, farmers' markets, restaurant supply relationships, and value-added processing that could transform raw agricultural products into premium finished goods. Most importantly, she learned about a growing consumer movement that was actively seeking alternatives to industrial agriculture. People who were willing to pay premium prices for food that was locally grown, sustainably produced, and traceable to specific farms and farmers. People who viewed their food purchases as statements about their values, their health priorities, and their commitment to environmental stewardship. By spring, Elena had developed a comprehensive business plan that would have impressed any venture capitalist. She was going to convert the Carrington farm from a struggling commodity operation into a diversified, sustainable agriculture enterprise that captured maximum value from every acre. The transformation started with soil remediation. Elena took soil samples from every field and had them analyzed by the Agricultural Extension Service. What she discovered was both encouraging and sobering. The land was fundamentally healthy, but decades of chemical-intensive farming had depleted organic matter and beneficial microorganisms that were essential for long-term productivity. Elena spent the entire spring planting cover crops, nitrogen-fixing legumes, deep-rooted plants that would break up compacted soil layers, and diverse seed mixtures that would restore biological activity. It was expensive work that wouldn't show immediate returns, but it was an investment in the land's future productive capacity. While the cover crops established themselves, Elena focused on developing higher-value enterprises that could generate income more quickly. She converted 2 acres of the best land near the farmhouse into intensive market gardens, using raised beds, drip irrigation systems, and succession planting strategies that would allow her to harvest multiple crops throughout the growing season. The vegetable operation was just the beginning. Elena also established a small flock of heritage breed chickens, both for eggs and meat production. Heritage breeds commanded premium prices from restaurants and specialty food stores because of their superior flavor profiles and the story they told about traditional agricultural practices. She planted a small orchard with unusual fruit varieties that weren't available in grocery stores: heirloom apples, European plums, Asian pears, and antique berry cultivars that local chefs and food enthusiasts would pay premium prices to obtain. But Elena's most innovative decision was to add value-added processing capabilities. She obtained the necessary permits and inspections to process farm products in a commercial kitchen that she built in the renovated equipment barn. This allowed her to make and sell products like artisanal preserves, pickled vegetables, herb-infused vinegars, and specialty baked goods using ingredients grown on the farm. The economic model was radically different from traditional commodity agriculture. Instead of selling raw products to wholesalers at market prices determined by global supply and demand, Elena was creating finished goods that she could sell directly to consumers at prices that reflected their full value. The first farmers' market was terrifying. Elena loaded her pickup truck with produce, eggs, preserves, and baked goods, and drove to the Saturday market in the nearest town, not sure if anyone would be interested in what she had to offer. She'd invested everything in product presentation: attractive signage, appealing packaging, clear labeling that told the story of where and how each item was produced. By noon, she was nearly sold out. Customers weren't just buying her products. They were engaging with her story, asking questions about her farming practices, requesting specific items for the following week, and giving her contact information so she could notify them when seasonal specialties became available. Elena realized that she wasn't just selling food. She was selling a relationship with agriculture that had been lost in the industrialization of food production. Her customers wanted to know the person who grew their vegetables, the farm where their eggs came from, the story behind the unique preserves they couldn't find anywhere else. The success at farmers' markets led to restaurant relationships. Elena started cold calling local chefs, offering to supply seasonal specialties that weren't available through conventional food distributors. The margins were excellent, and the consistent volume allowed her to plan production more effectively. Within 2 years, Elena had completely transformed the farm's financial picture. She was generating more revenue per acre than industrial operations 10 times her size, with profit margins that traditional commodity producers couldn't match. More importantly, she was building soil health, supporting biodiversity, and creating a sustainable business model that could adapt and evolve with changing market conditions. But Elena wasn't satisfied with just saving her own farm. She started sharing her knowledge with other struggling farmers in the region, helping them develop sustainable agriculture plans that could improve both their economic prospects and their environmental stewardship. She organized workshops, hosted farm tours, and connected producers with consumers through collaborative marketing initiatives. By year 5, Elena had become a recognized leader in the sustainable agriculture movement. She was invited to speak at conferences, consulted with agricultural extension services, and served on advisory boards for organizations promoting local food systems. The farm that Marcus had dismissed as hopeless was now being held up as a model for how small-scale agriculture could thrive in the modern economy. The physical transformation was equally dramatic. The farmhouse had been renovated with solar panels, energy-efficient appliances, and modern amenities that made it both comfortable and environmentally responsible. The barns had been converted into processing facilities, event spaces for farm dinners and educational programs. and retail areas where visitors could purchase farm products directly. Elena herself had been transformed by the challenges and successes of the previous decade. The uncertainty and vulnerability that had characterized her relationship with Marcus had been replaced by quiet confidence and unshakable determination. She'd proven to herself that she could analyze complex problems, develop innovative solutions, and execute plans that created real value in the world. She'd also learned important lessons about relationships and partnerships. The farm now employed 12 people year-round, with additional seasonal workers during harvest periods. Elena had discovered that working with people who shared her values and vision created energy and productivity that far exceeded what any individual could accomplish alone. Some of her employees had become business partners, developing complementary enterprises that strengthened the overall operation. Maria Santos had started a cut flower business that supplied local florists and event planners. James Mitchell had developed a mushroom cultivation operation that used agricultural waste products as a growing medium. Sarah Chen had established a farm-to-table catering service that showcased products from the farm and other local producers. Together, they'd created something that went far beyond a single agricultural operation. They'd built a community of people committed to proving that sustainable practices could be both environmentally responsible and economically viable. Elena often worked 16-hour days during the growing season, but it never felt like the desperate struggle that had characterized the farm's final years under her father's management. Every hour invested was building something stronger, more resilient, and more valuable. She was creating abundance rather than just trying to prevent loss. The local community had taken notice as well. The Carrington Farm had become a destination for agritourism, hosting farm dinners that showcased local cuisine, educational programs for school groups, and seasonal events that celebrated agricultural traditions. Elena had been elected to the County Economic Development Board and was frequently consulted on policies related to agricultural zoning, water rights, and rural development initiatives. By year 10, Elena owned her farm free and clear, with substantial capital reserves for continued improvements and expansion. She'd achieved financial security that exceeded what most college-educated professionals in urban areas could claim, while living according to principles that aligned with her deepest values. The woman who had been abandoned for clinging to a dying way of life had actually been pioneering the future of agriculture. She'd proven that tradition and innovation weren't opposites. They were complementary forces that could create something more powerful than either could achieve alone. Elena had learned to trust her instincts, to value her own judgment, and to build partnerships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. She discovered that she was capable of leadership, vision, and execution at levels she'd never imagined possible. What she didn't know was that her success had not gone unnoticed by someone from her past. Someone who was about to make an unwelcome return to discover just how much everything had changed. Marcus Whitfield had planned his return to Nebraska with the precision of a military campaign. The timing was deliberate. Mid-September, when harvest season would remind everyone of the agricultural struggles that had driven him away 15 years earlier. He'd arranged to stay at the Hillcrest Resort, the only upscale accommodation within 50 miles, ensuring he could observe the local community from a position of obvious prosperity. The technology sector had been exceptionally good to Marcus. His initial position at Technova Systems had led to senior roles at 3 different startups, culminating in his current position as Chief Technology Officer at a cybersecurity firm that had recently gone public. His stock options alone were worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, and his annual salary placed him firmly in the top 1% of American income earners. More importantly, Marcus had achieved the recognition and respect that had always eluded him in rural Nebraska. He was regularly quoted in technology publications, invited to speak at industry conferences, and sought after by headhunters representing the most prestigious companies in Silicon Valley. He'd built a social circle of influential entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and innovation leaders who moved in circles that small-town farm communities could never access. The California lifestyle suited him perfectly. His Palo Alto condo overlooked San Francisco Bay, with modern architecture and smart home technology that responded to voice commands and optimized everything from lighting to temperature to security systems. He drove a Tesla Model S, worked out at an exclusive gym, ate at restaurants where reservations required weeks of advance planning, and dated women who worked in fashion, media, and entertainment. Everything about his life represented progress, sophistication, and success. Everything, that is, except for the persistent curiosity about what had happened to Elena Carrington and the failing farm he'd refused to rescue. Marcus told himself that his return visit was motivated by closure, the psychological need to confirm that his difficult decision 15 years earlier had been vindicated by subsequent events. He'd made the smart choice by leaving, and Elena had presumably learned the hard lesson about clinging to unsustainable enterprises. But if he was being completely honest, Marcus was also driven by a less noble impulse, the desire to be proven right in a way that Elena could witness and acknowledge. He wanted her to see what he'd accomplished, to understand what she'd given up by refusing to follow him to California, and perhaps to admit that his assessment of their situation had been accurate all along. The drive from the airport gave Marcus his first indication that the rural Nebraska he remembered had changed in unexpected ways. The interstate exit that led toward Millbrook County was marked with new signage advertising farm-to-table restaurants, artisanal food producers, and agritourism destinations. The roads themselves were in better condition than he remembered, and several properties that had been abandoned during his youth now showed signs of investment and improvement. Marcus dismissed these observations as superficial improvements that probably masked underlying economic stagnation. Rural communities were always trying to reinvent themselves as tourist destinations when their traditional economic foundations collapsed. It was a predictable pattern that rarely resulted in sustainable prosperity. The Hillcrest Resort itself was a surprise, a tastefully renovated property that would have been respectable even by California standards. The lobby featured locally sourced materials, regional artwork, and sophisticated amenities that suggested a clientele more discerning than Marcus had expected to find in agricultural Nebraska. His suite overlooked rolling farmland that stretched to the horizon, and Marcus stood at the window, trying to orient himself to landmarks from his childhood. The landscape looked remarkably healthy and productive, with well-maintained buildings, modern equipment, and clear signs of active agricultural enterprise. That evening, Marcus drove into town for dinner, curious to see how the local community had fared during his absence. Main Street showed obvious signs of revitalization, renovated storefronts, busy restaurants, and pedestrian traffic that suggested economic vitality rather than rural decline. The restaurant he chose was advertising locally sourced ingredients and featuring seasonal menus that highlighted regional agricultural products. The hostess was a young woman who looked vaguely familiar, though Marcus couldn't place her. She led him to a table near the window and handed him a menu that was surprisingly sophisticated: grass-fed beef from local ranches, organic vegetables from nearby farms, artisanal cheeses from regional producers, and craft beers from a microbrewery that had apparently opened since his departure. "Are you visiting from out of town?" she asked with the friendly curiosity that Marcus remembered from his youth. "I grew up here," Marcus replied. "I'm back for a few days, catching up on how things have changed." "Oh, you picked a great time to visit. Tomorrow is the Harvest Festival at the Carrington Farm. Elena always puts on an amazing event. Farm tours, live music, local food vendors, educational workshops. It's become one of the biggest attractions in the county." Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure slip slightly. "The Carrington farm is still operating?" The hostess looked surprised by his question. "Of course. Elena's one of the most successful farmers in the state. Her sustainable agriculture program has been featured in national magazines. She's been invited to the White House twice to advise on rural economic development policy." Marcus ordered his meal mechanically, his mind racing to process information that contradicted everything he'd assumed about Elena's situation. The Carrington farm wasn't just surviving. It was apparently thriving to a degree that had earned national recognition. Over dinner, Marcus found himself eavesdropping on conversations at nearby tables. Multiple groups were discussing plans to attend the Harvest Festival, referring to Elena with the kind of respect and admiration typically reserved for community leaders and successful entrepreneurs. Someone mentioned that her farm had been selected as a model site for a documentary about innovative agriculture. Another conversation referenced her recent appointment to a state agricultural advisory board. Marcus finished his meal quickly and drove out toward the Carrington farm, telling himself he was just curious about the current condition of the property. The route was familiar, though the roads had been improved and several new homes had been built on lots that had been empty farmland during his youth. When Marcus reached the farm's entrance, he stopped his car and stared in disbelief at what lay before him. The property that had been struggling to survive 15 years earlier had been transformed into something that looked more like a destination resort than a traditional agricultural operation. The old farmhouse had been beautifully renovated, with solar panels, professional landscaping, and architectural details that maintained rural character while incorporating modern amenities. The barn that had housed broken-down equipment was now a spacious event facility with large windows, stylish lighting and parking areas that could accommodate hundreds of vehicles. Beyond the main buildings, Marcus could see row upon row of carefully maintained agricultural plots, greenhouse structures, orchards and pastures where livestock grazed peacefully. Equipment that was clearly expensive and state-of-the-art was visible in various locations. Everything showed signs of prosperity, careful management, and substantial ongoing investment. Most striking of all was the signage that identified the property as Carrington Sustainable Farms and listed multiple enterprises: organic produce, heritage livestock, artisanal food products, educational programs, and event hosting. A smaller sign announced that the farm had been certified organic, recognized as a wildlife habitat, and designated as a demonstration site for sustainable agriculture practices. Marcus sat in his car, engine idling, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with his memories of a desperate Elena struggling to keep a failing operation alive. This wasn't survival. This was success on a scale that exceeded anything he'd imagined possible for a small rural farm. The following morning, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on anything except his plans to attend the Harvest Festival. He told himself he was motivated by curiosity, but the truth was more complicated. The evidence of Elena's success had shaken his confidence in narratives he'd been telling himself for 15 years, about the wisdom of his choices and the inevitability of her failure. Marcus dressed carefully for the festival, choosing clothes that would demonstrate his prosperity while appearing appropriate for a rural setting. The designer jeans, Italian leather shoes, and Swiss watch were subtle indicators of his success, while the casual button-down shirt suggested he was comfortable in any environment. The festival was already crowded when Marcus arrived, with cars parked in organized rows across several fields and a steady stream of visitors walking toward the main event area. The scale of the operation was impressive. Professional signage, uniformed staff directing traffic, and infrastructure that could accommodate thousands of visitors. Marcus paid his admission fee to a teenage volunteer who thanked him for supporting sustainable agriculture education. The entrance area featured displays about organic farming techniques, soil conservation practices, and renewable energy systems. Information booths represented local businesses, environmental organizations, and agricultural extension services. The festival itself was a revelation. Instead of the desperate community fundraiser Marcus had expected, this was a sophisticated celebration of agricultural innovation and rural prosperity. Food vendors offered locally sourced cuisine that would have been competitive with upscale urban restaurants. Craft booths featured artisanal products made by regional artisans. Educational workshops covered topics like permaculture design, heritage seed preservation, and small-scale food processing. Live music played from a professional stage, where a bluegrass band entertained an audience that included families with children, young professionals, and elderly couples who appeared to be tourists rather than locals. The crowd was diverse, engaged, and obviously enjoying themselves at an event that had become a destination rather than simply a community gathering. Marcus wandered through the festival, observing everything with growing amazement. The farm tour was led by knowledgeable guides who explained sophisticated agricultural techniques and impressive productivity statistics. The processing facilities were spotless and efficiently organized, producing value-added products that commanded premium prices in specialty markets. But it was the conversation he overheard between two university professors that finally shattered Marcus's preconceptions about Elena's situation. They were discussing research collaboration opportunities with the Carrington farm, mentioning grants, publications, and academic partnerships that positioned Elena as a leader in sustainable agriculture innovation. She's been incredibly generous with sharing data and hosting graduate student research projects, one professor was saying. The yields she's achieving with organic methods are challenging some fundamental assumptions about agricultural productivity. The economic model is what really impresses me, his colleague replied. She's proving that small-scale operations can be more profitable per acre than industrial agriculture if you focus on value creation rather than volume production. Marcus realized that he'd been operating under assumptions that were 15 years out of date. The Eleanor he'd left behind, struggling, desperate, clinging to a failing enterprise, had evolved into someone completely different. Someone who had not only solved the problems he'd believed were insurmountable, but had created success that exceeded anything he'd achieved in his own career. The revelation was both impressive and unsettling. Marcus had built his identity around being the one who'd made smart choices, who'd recognized reality and acted accordingly. But the reality standing before him suggested that Elena's refusal to abandon her principles had led to achievements that made his own success look narrow and limited by comparison. Marcus was still processing these thoughts when he heard a familiar voice behind him, speaking to a group of visitors about heritage apple varieties and sustainable orchard management. He turned slowly, not sure he was ready to see how 15 years had changed the woman he'd once loved and ultimately abandoned. But there was no avoiding it now. Elena Carrington was walking toward his section of the orchard, leading a small group on an educational tour, speaking with the confidence and expertise of someone who had mastered every aspect of her profession. And Marcus realized, with a mixture of admiration and apprehension, that he was about to face the consequences of having underestimated Elena Carrington in every possible way. Elena moved through the orchard with the easy confidence of someone completely in her element. 15 years had refined her natural grace into something more powerful, the bearing of a woman who had tested herself against impossible challenges and emerged victorious. Her dark hair was shorter now, professionally styled but practical for outdoor work. She wore well-fitted jeans, sturdy boots, and a cotton shirt that managed to look both businesslike and perfectly suited to farm life. But it was her demeanor that struck Marcus most forcefully. The uncertainty and vulnerability he remembered had been replaced by quiet authority. Elena spoke to her tour group with the expertise of someone who understood every technical detail of her operation, but also with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved sharing her knowledge with others. These heritage varieties were nearly extinct 20 years ago, Elena was explaining to her group, which included a food writer from a national magazine, 2 agricultural researchers, and several local families. Commercial orchards abandon them because they don't ship well and have shorter shelf lives than modern hybrids. But the flavor profiles are extraordinary, and they're perfectly adapted to our local climate conditions. She reached up to pick an apple from a heavily laden branch, its red and gold skin catching the autumn sunlight. This is a maiden's blush, developed in New Jersey in the 1700s. The colonists prized it for both fresh eating and cider making. We're one of only 12 farms in the country that still grows this variety commercially. Elena handed the apple to the food writer, who bit into it and immediately closed her eyes in appreciation. The complexity is incredible. Sweet, but with this bright acidity and these subtle spice notes. This is nothing like grocery store apples. That's exactly the point, Elena replied. Industrial agriculture optimizes for consistency, storage life, and visual appeal. We optimize for flavor, nutrition, and ecological sustainability. Different priorities produce completely different results. Marcus found himself moving closer to the group, drawn by the evident passion in Elena's voice and the respectful attention she commanded from her listeners. She wasn't just giving a tour. She was conducting a masterclass in agricultural philosophy and practice. Our heritage orchards serve multiple purposes, Eleanor continued, leading the group toward a section where the trees were interspersed with other plants. We practice what's called agroforestry, integrating trees with other crops and livestock to create more diverse and resilient systems. The apple trees provide habitat for beneficial insects, their roots help prevent soil erosion, and their fallen leaves contribute organic matter that feeds the soil microorganisms. She gestured toward beehives, positioned strategically throughout the orchard. Our bee colonies pollinate the fruit trees, but they also service the wildflower meadows and vegetable crops. The honey is a valuable product in its own right. But the ecological services the bees provide are worth far more than what we earn from honey sales. The agricultural researcher in the group nodded appreciatively. You're essentially creating a closed-loop system where every component supports the others. Exactly. Instead of viewing agriculture as a series of separate enterprises, we design integrated systems that enhance each other's productivity and sustainability. It requires more knowledge and more sophisticated management, but the results speak for themselves. Eleanor led the group toward a demonstration area where different composting methods were displayed alongside explanatory signs. Marcus followed at a distance, fascinated despite himself by the depth of knowledge Eleanor had clearly developed. Soil health is the foundation of everything we do, Elena explained, picking up a handful of dark, rich earth from one of the compost bins. This isn't just dirt. It's a living ecosystem containing billions of microorganisms that transform organic matter into nutrients plants can access. Industrial agriculture treats soil as an inert medium for holding plants upright, while synthetic fertilizers provide nutrients. We treat soil as a partner that we need to feed and nurture. The food writer was taking notes rapidly. How do yields compare with conventional methods? Per acre productivity depends on what you're measuring, Elena replied. If you're only counting bushels of a single crop, industrial methods might produce higher volumes. But if you're measuring total economic output, ecological services, and long-term sustainability, our integrated systems are far superior. She gestured toward charts displayed on a nearby easel. Last year, we generated more revenue per acre than commodity corn and soybean operations that are 10 times our size. Our profit margins are higher because we capture the full retail value of our products instead of selling raw commodities to wholesalers. And we're building soil fertility every year instead of depleting it. Marcus studied the financial data Elena was presenting and felt a shock of recognition. The numbers were impressive by any standard, but they were particularly remarkable for agricultural operations. Elena had achieved profit margins that would be respectable in high-tech industries, while creating environmental benefits that couldn't be quantified in purely economic terms. More importantly, Elena continued, we're proving that agriculture can be regenerative rather than extractive. Every year, our land becomes more productive, more diverse, and more resilient. We're sequestering carbon, supporting wildlife populations, and contributing to watershed health. The food we produce is more nutritious and flavorful, and the working conditions are healthier for everyone involved. The tour group was clearly impressed, asking detailed questions about certification processes, marketing strategies, and scalability. Elena answered everything with a combination of technical expertise and genuine enthusiasm that made even complex topics accessible to general audiences. As the group moved toward the processing facilities, Marcus found himself directly in Elena's line of sight for the first time. Their eyes met across a distance of perhaps 20 feet, and he saw the exact moment when recognition dawned in her expression. Elena's professional composure never wavered, but Marcus caught a brief flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or calculation, before she smoothly continued her presentation. She didn't acknowledge him directly, but he was certain she was aware of his presence as she led the group through the remainder of the tour. When the official tour concluded and the group dispersed toward other festival activities, Elena finally approached Marcus. She moved with deliberate purpose, neither hurrying nor hesitating, stopping a comfortable distance away, with her arms relaxed at her sides. "Hello, Marcus." Her voice was pleasant but neutral, offering no clues about her emotional state. "Hello, Elena." Marcus was surprised by how normal his own voice sounded, given the complexity of emotions churning inside him. "It's good to see you, is it?" Elena's question was direct but not hostile. "I have to admit, I'm curious about what brought you back to Nebraska after 15 years. Marcus had prepared for this moment, rehearsing various explanations that would position his return in the most favorable light. But standing before Elena, surrounded by evidence of her remarkable success, his carefully crafted responses seemed inadequate. "Business trip to Chicago," he said finally. "I decided to take a detour and see how things had changed around here." Elena nodded, her expression giving nothing away. "And what do you think? How have things changed?" The question was a trap, and they both knew it. Marcus could hardly claim that rural Nebraska had declined as he'd predicted, given the obvious prosperity surrounding them. But acknowledging Elena's success would require admitting that his assessment of her situation had been fundamentally wrong. "More than I expected," Marcus replied carefully. "The community seems to be doing well." "The community is doing extraordinarily well," Elena corrected gently. "We've become a model for rural economic development, agricultural tourism, value-added processing, sustainable farming practices, renewable energy adoption. We're implementing innovations that other regions are studying and attempting to replicate." She gestured toward the festival activities continuing around them. "This event will bring in over $50,000 in direct revenue to local businesses, plus indirect economic impacts that ripple through the entire county. We host events like this 8 times a year, along with educational workshops, corporate retreats, and research collaborations with universities." Marcus absorbed this information with growing discomfort. Elena wasn't just sharing general community news. She was systematically dismantling his assumptions about rural economic limitations. "That's impressive," he said, meaning it despite his discomfort. "It's the result of a lot of hard work by a lot of people who believed that rural communities could innovate and thrive, instead of just managing decline." Elena's tone remained neutral. But Marcus caught the implication. They stood in silence for a moment, watching festival-goers enjoy activities that represented Elena's vision made manifest. Marcus was acutely aware that he was surrounded by evidence of possibilities he had never considered, opportunities he had dismissed without serious investigation. "I heard you've done well in California," Elena said eventually. "Technology sector, right?" "Software development, cybersecurity. I'm the CTO at a company that went public last year." Marcus was grateful for the change of subject, returning to familiar ground where his achievements were unambiguous. "That sounds like exactly what you wanted when you left. You must be satisfied with how things worked out." Marcus studied Elena's expression, searching for sarcasm or bitterness, but found neither. She seemed genuinely interested in his answer, without apparent emotional investment in his response. "I've been fortunate," Marcus said. "The technology industry has provided opportunities I couldn't have imagined when I was younger." "Good. I'm glad you found what you were looking for." The simple statement caught Marcus off guard. He'd expected resentment, accusations, or at least some acknowledgement of the pain his departure had caused. Elena's apparent lack of bitterness was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "What about you?" Marcus asked. "Are you satisfied with how things worked out?" Elena smiled for the first time since their conversation began, and Marcus was struck by how genuinely happy she appeared. Not triumphant or vindictive, but content in a way that seemed to come from deep personal fulfillment. "I love my life," Elena said simply. "Every day brings challenges that require creativity and problem-solving. I work with people who share my values and vision. I'm contributing to solutions for problems that matter: food security, environmental sustainability, rural economic development. And I've learned that I'm capable of far more than I once believed possible." She paused, looking out over the festival grounds where hundreds of people were enjoying an event that represented her life's work. "I suppose I should thank you, actually." "Thank me? Your decision to leave forced me to discover what I was really capable of. If you'd stayed, if we'd compromised and found some middle ground, I might never have pushed myself to achieve what I've accomplished. Sometimes the most difficult experiences teach us the most valuable lessons." Marcus felt as though Elena had just delivered a perfectly executed checkmate in a chess game he hadn't realized they were playing. She'd acknowledged his role in her success while simultaneously making it clear that his departure had ultimately benefited her more than his presence ever could have. "I'm not sure what to say to that," Marcus admitted. "You don't need to say anything. We made different choices, and we both found success in our own ways. The world is large enough for multiple definitions of a life well lived." Elena checked her watch, a practical piece that looked designed for someone who spent time outdoors. "I should get back to my responsibilities. The afternoon workshops start in 20 minutes, and I'm presenting on integrated pest management strategies." She extended her hand for a professional handshake. "It was good to see you, Marcus. I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival." Marcus shook her hand, noting the calluses that spoke of years of physical work, the strength that came from daily challenges overcome. "Elena, I know," she said gently, cutting off whatever apology or explanation he'd been preparing. "But that was a long time ago, and we're different people now. Some conversations don't need to be had." Elena walked away with the same confident stride that had carried her through the orchard tour, leaving Marcus standing alone among the festival crowds. He watched her join a group of colleagues near the education pavilion, immediately engaging in animated discussion about the afternoon's programming. Marcus remained at the festival for another hour, observing Elena from a distance as she moved seamlessly between teaching, hosting, networking, and managing the complex logistics of a large public event. She was clearly respected by everyone she interacted with: employees, visitors, fellow farmers, academic researchers, and government officials who had apparently come specifically to consult with her about policy initiatives. Every interaction reinforced the same conclusion: Elena Carrington had become a leader, an innovator, and a success story that commanded genuine respect from diverse constituencies. She had built something significant, sustainable, and valuable in ways that extended far beyond simple financial metrics. When Marcus finally returned to his hotel room that evening, he found himself questioning narratives about success, progress, and smart decision-making that had guided his life for 15 years. Elena's achievement didn't diminish his own accomplishments, but it challenged his assumptions about the relative value of different life paths. Marcus had gained wealth, status, and professional recognition by leaving rural Nebraska behind. But Elena had gained something that suddenly seemed more valuable: the deep satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful in a place you love, surrounded by people who share your vision for a better world. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus wondered if he had been the one who had chosen poorly. Marcus spent the night staring at the ceiling of his hotel room, replaying every moment of his encounter with Elena. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by waves of discomfort that had nothing to do with the unfamiliar bed or rural quiet. He'd built his entire professional identity around being the person who made smart decisions, who saw opportunities others missed, who understood market dynamics and technological trends before they became obvious to everyone else. But Elena's success represented a possibility he'd never even considered 15 years ago. He'd dismissed her commitment to the farm as emotional attachment that blinded her to economic reality. He'd framed his departure as a necessary choice between sentiment and practicality, between clinging to the past and embracing the future. What he'd failed to recognize was that Elena hadn't been clinging to anything. She'd been preparing to build something entirely new. Marcus rose before dawn and drove back to the Carrington farm, telling himself he wanted to see the operation without the crowds and festivities that had dominated yesterday's visit. The truth was more complicated. He needed to understand how Elena had accomplished what she'd accomplished, and whether there were lessons he could extract that might inform his own future decisions. The farm was already bustling with activity despite the early hour. Workers moved efficiently through the various enterprises, checking livestock, harvesting vegetables, and preparing products for processing. Marcus parked near the visitor center and watched the morning routines unfold with the precision of a well-orchestrated operation. Elena emerged from the farmhouse, carrying a steaming mug of coffee and a tablet computer, reviewing what appeared to be production schedules or financial reports. She wore work clothes, but moved with the authority of an executive managing a complex enterprise. When she noticed Marcus's car in the parking area, she walked over with the same calm directness she'd displayed the previous day. "You're up early," she observed, stopping a comfortable distance from his car window. "I wanted to see how the operation functions on a normal day," Marcus replied. "Yesterday was impressive, but festival days can be misleading." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Would you like a tour?" "A real one this time, not the public relations version we offer to visitors." Marcus hesitated, uncertain whether accepting her invitation would provide the closure he sought or simply deepen his discomfort with conclusions he was beginning to reach about his own choices. "Yes," he said finally. "I'd like that." Elena led him first to the processing facility, where workers were preparing preserved foods, baked goods, and specialty products that would be distributed to restaurants and specialty stores throughout the region. The operation was impressively professional, with commercial-grade equipment, quality control protocols, and packaging that would be competitive in any market. "This is where we capture the most value from our raw agricultural products," Elena explained, pausing beside a production line where workers were assembling gift baskets featuring farm-produced items. A pound of apples might sell for $2 at commodity prices, but that same pound of apples, processed into artisanal preserves or specialty vinegars, can generate $20 in retail revenue. Marcus studied the financial charts displayed on the facility wall, which tracked production costs, profit margins, and sales volumes for different product categories. The numbers were genuinely impressive, representing profit margins that exceeded what many technology companies achieved. The key insight, Elena continued, was recognizing that consumers weren't just buying food products. They were buying stories, values, and experiences that connected them to agriculture in ways that industrial food systems had eliminated. They moved through the greenhouse complex, where vegetables grew in carefully controlled environments that maximized productivity while minimizing resource consumption. Elena explained hydroponic systems, integrated pest management strategies, and climate-control technologies that allowed year-round production of high-value crops. We use more technology per square foot than most Silicon Valley companies, Elena noted with obvious satisfaction. Automated irrigation systems, soil sensors, climate monitoring, inventory management software, customer relationship databases, financial modeling applications. The difference is that our technology serves agricultural production rather than replacing human activity entirely. Marcus recognized several software systems that his own company had developed for industrial applications. Elena was using cutting-edge technology to optimize traditional agricultural practices, creating hybrid systems that captured the benefits of both approaches. The irony, Elena said, reading his expression accurately, is that modern sustainable agriculture requires more sophisticated technology and data analysis than most urban professionals ever encounter. We're not rejecting progress. We're applying it more thoughtfully. They visited the livestock areas, where heritage breed cattle, pigs, and poultry lived in conditions that prioritized animal welfare while maintaining economic viability. Elena explained genetic preservation programs, rotational grazing systems, and direct marketing strategies that commanded premium prices from restaurants and consumers seeking alternatives to industrial meat production. These animals represent genetic diversity that would be lost if we relied entirely on industrial breeds optimized for confinement systems, Elena said, watching a group of children chase chickens around a spacious pasture. Preserving agricultural biodiversity isn't just environmentally responsible, it's economically smart, because diversity creates resilience against diseases, climate variations, and changing market conditions. Marcus was beginning to understand that Eleanor's success wasn't the result of stubbornly clinging to traditional practices. She'd created something that was simultaneously innovative and rooted, technologically sophisticated and environmentally sustainable, economically viable and socially beneficial. How did you know this would work? Marcus asked, as they walked toward the renewable energy installations that powered much of the farm's operations. 15 years ago, when I left, there was no indication that these markets existed or that these approaches were feasible. Elena stopped walking and considered his question carefully. I didn't know it would work. I knew that what we were doing wasn't working, and I knew that doing nothing would guarantee failure. Beyond that, I had to learn as I went. She gestured toward the solar panels and wind turbines that generated clean energy for the farm's operations. Every innovation started as an experiment. Some failed completely. Others succeeded beyond my expectations. But each experiment taught me something that informed the next decision. That sounds incredibly risky. Riskier than abandoning everything my family had built and starting over in a completely different field. Elena's question was pointed but not accusatory. Every choice involves risk, Marcus. The question is whether you're taking risks to build something or taking risks to avoid dealing with challenges. They climbed a small hill that provided an overview of the entire operation. From this vantage point, Marcus could see the integrated systems Elena had created. Crop production areas flowing seamlessly into processing facilities. Livestock operations connected to renewable energy installations. Educational spaces linked to commercial enterprises. The biggest risk, Elena continued, was believing that I could learn what I needed to learn and implement what I needed to implement. Everything else was just technical problems that could be solved with enough research, experimentation, and persistence. Marcus studied the landscape below them, trying to imagine the decision-making process that had transformed a struggling commodity farm into the diversified enterprise he was observing. Elena had essentially reinvented agriculture on her property, creating something that served multiple markets while supporting environmental and social goals. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed?" Marcus asked. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. When she finally spoke, her answer surprised him. "I used to. For the first few years, I imagined scenarios where we'd figured out how to work together, where your technical skills and my agricultural knowledge created something neither of us could have accomplished alone." She paused, then continued more slowly. "But I realized those fantasies were based on a version of you that didn't exist." "What do you mean?" "The Marcus I fell in love with was curious, creative, and willing to tackle difficult problems. But the Marcus who left was someone who gave up when solutions weren't immediately obvious. You saw challenges as obstacles instead of opportunities to innovate." Eleanor turned to face him directly. "If you'd stayed, you would have brought that mindset to everything we tried. Every experiment that failed would have been evidence that the whole approach was hopeless. Every setback would have been justification for abandoning the effort. You would have undermined the confidence and persistence that were essential for making this work." The assessment was delivered without malice, but Marcus felt its impact like a physical blow. Elena was suggesting that his presence would have prevented her success rather than contributing to it. "That's a harsh judgment." "It's an honest one. You're brilliant at optimization, Marcus. You're exceptional at making existing systems more efficient. But you're not comfortable with fundamental uncertainty or long-term vision that requires faith in possibilities you can't yet prove." Elena gestured toward the farm spread out below them. "Everything you see here started with believing that better solutions were possible, even when I couldn't demonstrate how to achieve them. That required a different kind of intelligence than what's rewarded in corporate environments." Marcus wanted to argue, but he found himself reconsidering his approach to challenges throughout his career. Elena was right that he'd consistently chosen opportunities where success metrics were clearly defined and pathways to achievement were well established. He'd avoided situations that required inventing entirely new approaches to complex problems. "What I've accomplished here," Elena continued, "required becoming comfortable with not knowing whether my ideas would work until after I'd invested time, money, and emotional energy in testing them. You've always needed certainty before commitment." They walked back toward the visitor center in silence, Marcus processing Elena's analysis of his character and decision-making patterns. She'd identified something fundamental about his relationship to risk and innovation that he'd never acknowledged to himself. "There's something else," Elena said as they reached his car. "You came back here expecting to find me exactly where you left me, struggling, desperate, probably willing to admit that you'd been right to leave. You wanted validation for your choices." Marcus started to protest, but Elena held up a hand to stop him. "The problem is that validation built on someone else's failure isn't actually worth having. If I'd failed, it wouldn't prove that your success was meaningful. It would just prove that two people made different choices and got different results." She leaned against the fence that bordered the parking area, her expression thoughtful but not unkind. "Real validation comes from building something you're proud of, regardless of what anyone else accomplishes or fails to accomplish. I learned that lesson the hard way after you left." Marcus recognized the truth in Elena's observation. His professional achievements were substantial and meaningful in their own right, but some part of him had always measured their worth against the alternative path he'd rejected. Elena's success had forced him to confront the possibility that both paths might have led to valuable outcomes, which somehow diminished his sense of having made the obviously correct choice. "I should go," Marcus said finally. "I've taken enough of your time, and I have a flight to catch." "Before you leave," Elena said, "I want you to know that I don't regret how things worked out for either of us. You found what you were looking for in California, and I found what I was looking for here. Sometimes people are better apart than together, even when they care about each other." She extended her hand again, and Marcus shook it, noting once more the strength and competence it represented. "Take care of yourself, Marcus. I hope you find what you're really looking for." As Marcus drove away from the Carrington farm for what he suspected would be the final time, he carried with him questions that would reshape his understanding of success, innovation, and the courage required to build something meaningful in an uncertain world. Elena had given him far more than closure. She'd given him a mirror that reflected possibilities he'd never considered and challenges he'd never been willing to face. The question now was what he would choose to do with that reflection. The flight back to San Francisco gave Marcus 5 hours to contemplate the wreckage of assumptions he'd carried for 15 years. He'd boarded the plane, expecting to feel relief, satisfaction, and confirmation that his life choices had been vindicated by Elena's presumed struggles. Instead, he found himself questioning everything he'd built his identity around. The businessman in the seat beside him was reviewing quarterly reports on his laptop, highlighting metrics and performance indicators that would have fascinated Marcus a week earlier. Now, watching the endless spreadsheets and profit projections, Marcus found himself wondering what those numbers actually represented. Were they measuring meaningful productivity, or just elaborate ways of moving money around without creating anything of lasting value? Marcus opened his own laptop and pulled up his company's latest financial statements. The numbers were impressive by any conventional measure: revenue growth, profit margins, market share expansion, stock price appreciation. His personal compensation package placed him in the top tier of technology executives, with stock options that would eventually make him independently wealthy by most definitions. But Elena's farm had generated comparable profits while simultaneously improving soil health, supporting wildlife populations, providing educational opportunities, creating meaningful employment for local residents, and contributing to food security for the surrounding region. Her success created value that rippled outward in ways that benefited entire communities. While his success primarily benefited shareholders and executives within his company, the comparison wasn't entirely fair, Marcus acknowledged. Technology companies created value in different ways: innovation, efficiency improvements, communications platforms that connected people across vast distances. His cybersecurity work protected sensitive data and infrastructure from malicious attacks, which served important social functions even if they weren't as immediately visible as agricultural production. But the comparison raised uncomfortable questions about the relationship between personal success and meaningful contribution to the world. Marcus had optimized his career for financial rewards and professional recognition, which he'd achieved in abundance. Elena had optimized hers for environmental sustainability, community development, and agricultural innovation, which had unexpectedly generated financial rewards as a byproduct of pursuing other goals. When the plane touched down in San Francisco, Marcus felt like he was returning to someone else's life. The sleek terminal, the efficient ground transportation, the familiar skyline of a city that represented technological progress and economic dynamism. Everything that had once excited him about California now felt somehow hollow. His Palo Alto condo was exactly as he'd left it: immaculately clean, perfectly climate-controlled, filled with expensive furniture and cutting-edge electronics that represented the lifestyle of a successful technology executive. Marcus stood in his living room, looking out at San Francisco Bay, and realized that despite owning everything he'd once dreamed of having, He felt profoundly disconnected from any sense of purpose or meaning. The following Monday brought Marcus back to his office, where he was immediately immersed in meetings about product development, market strategy, and competitive positioning. His colleagues welcomed him back enthusiastically, eager to hear his thoughts on technical challenges they'd encountered during his absence. For the first time in his career, Marcus found it difficult to generate enthusiasm for problems that had previously energized him. The work was intellectually stimulating and financially rewarding, but it felt abstract in ways that bothered him. They were creating products that would be used by people he'd never meet, to solve problems he'd never experience in environments he'd never see. During his lunch break, Marcus found himself researching sustainable agriculture initiatives in California. He discovered that the state was leading the nation in organic farming innovation, renewable energy adoption in agricultural settings, and water conservation technologies that were essential for long-term environmental sustainability. More intriguingly, he learned about technology companies that were developing specialized software and hardware solutions for sustainable agriculture applications. Precision farming tools, soil monitoring systems, automated greenhouse management, supply chain optimization for local food networks. There was an entire sector of technology development focused on exactly the kinds of challenges Elena had been solving through trial and error. Marcus spent the evening exploring this intersection of technology and agriculture more deeply. He found academic research programs, startup companies, venture capital funds, and government initiatives all focused on developing technological solutions for environmental and agricultural challenges. It was a rapidly growing field that attracted some of the most innovative minds in both technology and environmental science. The discovery was both exciting and frustrating. Marcus realized that he could have been applying his technical skills to problems similar to Elena's all along, if he'd ever considered that possibility. The assumption that meaningful agricultural work required abandoning technology had prevented him from seeing opportunities that now seemed obvious in retrospect. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself increasingly distracted from his current responsibilities. He attended industry conferences and networking events, but instead of focusing on cybersecurity applications, he sought out presentations about agricultural technology, environmental monitoring, and sustainable business models. The more Marcus learned, the more convinced he became that the most interesting technological challenges of the next decade would emerge from efforts to solve environmental problems. Climate change adaptation, resource conservation, renewable energy integration, circular economy design. These were complex systems problems that required exactly the kind of analytical thinking and innovative problem-solving that had attracted him to technology in the first place. Marcus began having informal conversations with colleagues about potential career transitions, framing his interest in environmental technology as a logical extension of his existing expertise. The responses were mixed. Some colleagues expressed admiration for his social consciousness, while others questioned whether environmental applications offered sufficient financial upside to justify leaving his current position. The financial concerns were legitimate. Marcus's current role provided compensation and benefits that would be difficult to replicate in smaller companies or startup environments. Moving into environmental technology would likely require accepting reduced income in exchange for working on problems he found more meaningful, but Elena's example had demonstrated that financial success and meaningful work weren't mutually exclusive. She'd achieved both by refusing to accept that she had to choose between them. Marcus began wondering whether his assumption that environmental work meant financial sacrifice reflected limited imagination rather than economic reality. The decisive moment came during a company retreat in Lake Tahoe, where Marcus found himself standing on a mountain overlook, discussing quarterly projections with his CEO. The executive was enthusiastic about expansion plans that would double the company's size within 3 years. creating opportunities for Marcus to advance to increasingly senior positions with correspondingly higher compensation. You've got the technical skills and leadership experience to become our next chief technology officer when Harrison retires, the CEO said. That's a track to becoming one of the highest paid executives in the cybersecurity sector. Marcus looked out over the pristine lake surrounded by snow-capped mountains and realized that the prospect of becoming even more successful in his current field felt like a prison sentence rather than an opportunity. He'd mastered the skills required for advancement, but advancement itself no longer excited him. What if I told you I was thinking about a career change? Marcus asked. The CEO looked genuinely surprised. To what, another cybersecurity company? We could match any offer you're considering. Environmental technology, agricultural applications, sustainability initiatives. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. When the CEO finally responded, his tone had shifted from enthusiastic to cautious. That's an interesting hobby interest, Marcus, but it's not a serious career path for someone with your earning potential. Environmental technology is mostly grant-funded research and startup companies that never achieve meaningful scale. You'd be throwing away everything you've built here. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with the CEO offering various incentives and arguing against what he characterized as an impulsive decision driven by misplaced idealism. But Marcus realized that his thinking had already crystallized around a conclusion that surprised him with its clarity. He didn't want to become the most successful version of who he currently was. He wanted to become a different person entirely. The resignation process took 3 months, during which Marcus carefully researched opportunities in environmental technology and sustainable agriculture. He discovered several companies developing innovative solutions for precision farming, renewable energy integration, and supply chain optimization for local food networks. More importantly, Marcus identified opportunities to combine his cybersecurity expertise with environmental applications. Agricultural operations were increasingly dependent on digital systems that required protection from cyber attacks. Renewable energy infrastructure needed secure communications protocols. Environmental monitoring networks required data protection and privacy safeguards. Instead of viewing his career change as abandoning his existing expertise, Marcus began framing it as applying proven skills to more meaningful problems. The technical challenges were complex and fascinating, while the potential for positive environmental impact provided the sense of purpose that had been missing from his previous worked up. Marcus's colleagues' reactions to his resignation ranged from supportive to bewildered. Several expressed admiration for his willingness to pursue more meaningful work, while others warned that he was making a costly mistake that would limit his long-term earning potential. The most interesting conversation was with his closest friend at the company, who pulled Marcus aside during his farewell party to share his own growing dissatisfaction with their industry's focus on profit maximization rather than social contribution. I've been watching you research this environmental stuff for months, his friend said. Part of me wonders if you're figuring out something the rest of us are too scared to acknowledge, which is what? Maybe success isn't just about making as much money as possible. Maybe it's about building something that matters, even if the financial rewards are less predictable. Marcus moved out of his Palo Alto condo and relocated to Davis, California, where he'd accepted a position with a startup company developing integrated software platforms for sustainable agriculture operations. The salary was 60% of what he'd been earning in cybersecurity. But the work involved exactly the kinds of complex systems challenges that had originally attracted him to technology. His new company was developing tools that would help farmers optimize resource usage, monitor environmental impacts, and connect directly with consumers seeking locally produced food. The software integrated data from soil sensors, weather monitoring systems, irrigation controls, and financial management applications to provide farmers with comprehensive decision support tools. Marcus's first major project involved developing cybersecurity protocols for agricultural data networks, protecting sensitive information about farming operations, financial records, and customer relationships. It was technical work that built on his existing expertise while serving environmental and agricultural sustainability goals. More significantly, Marcus discovered that his new colleagues shared values and priorities that resonated with his evolving understanding of meaningful work. Instead of competing to maximize individual compensation, they collaborated to solve problems that would benefit farming communities and environmental sustainability. The company culture emphasized learning, experimentation, and long-term vision over short-term profit maximization. Failure was viewed as an essential component of innovation rather than a career limitation. Employees were encouraged to develop expertise across multiple disciplines, creating the kind of intellectual diversity that generated creative solutions to complex problems. 6 months into his new position, Marcus received an unexpected email from Elena. She'd learned about his career transition through mutual connections in the sustainable agriculture community and wanted to congratulate him on what she characterized as a courageous decision to align his professional work with his values. I hope you're finding the same satisfaction in meaningful work that I discovered when I stopped trying to preserve the past and started building the future, Elena wrote. The world needs more people willing to apply their talents to problems that matter. Marcus replied with gratitude for her example and the difficult questions she'd forced him to confront about success, innovation, and the courage required to pursue work that created value beyond personal financial gain. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus felt like he was moving towards something rather than away from something. Elena had shown him that the most profound success came not from achieving predetermined goals, but from discovering purposes worth pursuing, even when the outcomes remained uncertain. Marcus was finally ready to find out what he could build when he stopped optimizing for safety and started optimizing for meaning. 3 years after Marcus's career transformation, the annual Sustainable Agriculture Technology Conference was being held in Sacramento, California. The event had grown from a small gathering of environmental researchers into a major industry conference, attracting thousands of participants from around the world. Marcus was scheduled to deliver a keynote presentation about cybersecurity challenges in precision agriculture, drawing on his experience protecting agricultural data networks from increasingly sophisticated cyber threats. The irony wasn't lost on him that his professional reputation was now built on expertise that bridged the technology sector he'd originally pursued and the agricultural world he'd once abandoned. His company had become a leader in developing integrated security solutions for smart farming operations, protecting everything from irrigation control systems to livestock monitoring networks to financial management platforms used by sustainable agriculture enterprises. As Marcus reviewed his presentation materials in the hotel business center, he noticed a familiar name on the conference speaker list. Elena Carrington was scheduled to participate in a panel discussion about scaling sustainable agriculture practices through technology partnerships. The listing identified her as CEO of Carrington Agricultural Innovations, a designation that suggested her operation had evolved considerably since their last encounter. Marcus attended Elena's panel discussion with curiosity about how her work had developed during the years since his visit to Nebraska. What he discovered was that Elena had become a nationally recognized leader in agricultural innovation, consulted by government agencies, university research programs, and private companies seeking to understand how sustainable practices could be implemented at commercial scale. The panel focused on collaboration between farmers and technology companies, exploring how digital tools could support rather than replace traditional agricultural knowledge. Elena spoke with the authority of someone who had successfully integrated technological innovation with environmental stewardship, creating models that other operators were studying and attempting to replicate. The key insight, Elena explained to the audience, is that technology should amplify human expertise rather than substitute for it. The most successful agricultural innovations combine sophisticated data analysis with deep understanding of ecological relationships that can only be developed through years of hands-on experience. She described partnerships with software developers, equipment manufacturers, and research institutions that had allowed her operation to serve as a testing ground for emerging technologies. These collaborations generated revenue through licensing agreements and consulting relationships, while advancing the development of tools that could benefit the broader agricultural community. We've learned that farmers and technologists often approach problems from opposite directions. Elena continued, farmers start with practical challenges in specific environments and look for tools that can help solve those challenges. Technologists start with innovative capabilities and look for applications where those capabilities might be useful. Elena gestured toward charts showing productivity improvements achieved through various technology integrations. The most successful collaborations occur when both perspectives inform the development process from the beginning. Farmers need to understand technological possibilities, and technologists need to understand agricultural realities. Marcus found himself impressed by Elena's sophisticated understanding of technology development processes and market dynamics. She'd clearly invested considerable effort in learning how to communicate with technology professionals and evaluate potential partnerships. After the panel concluded, Marcus approached Elena during the networking reception. She recognized him immediately and greeted him with genuine warmth, free from any awkwardness about their complicated history. "I heard you'd made the transition to agricultural technology," Elena said. "How has that worked out for you?" "Better than I expected," Marcus replied honestly. "I'm discovering that the most interesting technical challenges emerge when you're trying to solve real problems in complex environments." Elena smiled. "That sounds familiar. I remember someone telling me that agricultural work was too limiting for ambitious people, that someone was wrong about a lot of things," Marcus admitted, "though I'm grateful for the education I've received since then." They moved to a quieter area of the reception space, away from the crowds and conversations that filled the main room. Marcus was struck by how natural their interaction felt, as if the tension and unresolved emotions from their previous encounters had been replaced by mutual respect between professional colleagues. "I read about your cybersecurity work in Agricultural Technology Weekly," Elena said. "The article mentioned that you'd helped prevent several major attacks on farming operations. That must be satisfying work." "It is. Though I have to admit, I never imagined I'd become an expert in protecting livestock monitoring systems and soil sensor networks." Elena laughed. "Life has a way of connecting things we thought were completely separate. The skills you developed in corporate cybersecurity are probably more relevant to modern agriculture than either of us realized 15 years ago." Marcus nodded, considering how his career path had led him back toward agricultural applications through routes he couldn't have predicted. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Our assumptions about what's possible can limit our ability to see opportunities that are right in front of us." "Speaking of opportunities," Elena said, "I have a proposition that might interest you. We're planning a major expansion of our technology partnerships, and we need someone with deep cybersecurity expertise to help design the infrastructure for a network of interconnected, sustainable farms." She explained that Carrington Agricultural Innovations was developing a collaboration platform that would allow sustainable farms to share data, coordinate production planning, and collectively negotiate with suppliers and purchasers. The system would require sophisticated security protocols to protect sensitive business information while enabling the kind of cooperation that could strengthen small and medium-sized agricultural operations. The project combines everything you've been working on, Elena continued. Cybersecurity, agricultural applications, sustainable business models, and technology that serves social and environmental goals rather than just profit maximization. Marcus was intrigued by the technical challenges Elena described, but also by the opportunity to work directly with the person whose example had inspired his career transformation. What kind of arrangement are you envisioning? A consulting partnership initially with potential for equity participation if the collaboration works well for both of us. You'd maintain your current position while helping us design the security architecture for the network. If the project succeeds, there might be opportunities for deeper involvement. Elena pulled out her tablet and showed Marcus preliminary designs for the collaborative platform. The technical requirements were complex and fascinating, involving secure data sharing protocols, privacy protection systems, and integration challenges that would require innovative solutions. The goal is to prove that small-scale sustainable operations can achieve economies of scale and market influence typically available only to industrial agriculture companies, Elena explained. But that requires trust, which requires security systems that protect everyone's interests while enabling genuine collaboration. Marcus studied the technical specifications, recognizing problems that would challenge his expertise while advancing goals he'd come to care about deeply. The project represented exactly the kind of meaningful work he'd been seeking since leaving cybersecurity. I'm interested, Marcus said. Though I have to ask, are you comfortable working with someone who once dismissed everything you were trying to accomplish? Elena considered his question carefully before responding. I think the person who dismissed my work 15 years ago and the person standing here today are quite different. People change, Marcus. The question is whether they change in directions that make them better collaborators and more thoughtful human beings. She paused, looking out the reception hall window toward the California farmland, visible in the distance. Besides, some of the best partnerships emerge between people who understand each other's strengths and limitations from personal experience. We've both learned things about work and life and what matters that we couldn't have understood when we were younger. Marcus realized that Elena was offering him something more valuable than a business opportunity. She was extending the possibility of redemption, the chance to apply his skills in service of goals he'd once failed to appreciate. Working with someone he'd once underestimated. There's something else, Elena added. The network we're building will start with farms in Nebraska, but the long-term plan includes operations throughout the Midwest. If you decide to get involved, you'll be helping protect and strengthen the kind of agricultural communities we both grew up in. The observation struck Marcus with unexpected emotional force. He'd spent 15 years pursuing success that took him as far as possible from his rural origins, only to discover that his most meaningful work involved protecting and supporting exactly the communities he'd been so eager to leave behind. I'd like to start with the consulting arrangement and see how it develops, Marcus said finally. Though I should warn you that I'm still learning how to work collaboratively rather than competitively. Elena extended her hand with a grin that reminded Marcus of the young woman he'd fallen in love with decades earlier, before career pressures and different visions of success had driven them apart. I think we're both still learning that. But maybe that's what makes it interesting. 6 months later, Marcus found himself back on Elena's farm in Nebraska, but this time as a professional partner rather than a returning ex-lover seeking validation. He was leading a team of cybersecurity specialists in implementing the network infrastructure that would connect 50 sustainable farms across 3 states. The technical work was challenging and satisfying, requiring innovative solutions to novel problems that emerged from the intersection of agriculture, technology, and environmental sustainability. More importantly, Marcus was contributing to a project that strengthened rural communities while advancing agricultural practices that could help address climate change and food security challenges. Working with Elena proved surprisingly natural, despite their complicated personal history. They'd both developed professional skills and emotional maturity that allowed them to collaborate effectively while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Their shared understanding of agricultural communities and technology applications created a productive partnership that benefited from their different perspectives and expertise. The network launch exceeded everyone's expectations, with participating farms reporting significant improvements in operational efficiency, market access, and financial performance. The security systems Marcus had designed protected sensitive information while enabling the kind of data sharing that allowed small operations to achieve collective bargaining power and shared resource optimization. More significantly, the project attracted attention from agricultural policymakers, environmental organizations, and technology companies seeking to understand how digital tools could support sustainable agriculture at scale. Elena and Marcus found themselves co-presenting at conferences, collaborating on research publications, and consulting with organizations seeking to replicate their approach. The professional partnership led to personal friendship, as Marcus and Elena discovered that they genuinely enjoyed each other's company when they weren't trying to resolve fundamental disagreements about life direction. They'd both grown into people who could appreciate different approaches to success and fulfillment without needing to prove that their own choices were superior. On the final day of the network implementation project, Marcus and Elena stood in the same orchard where they'd had their difficult conversation during his return visit 5 years earlier. The apple trees were heavy with fruit, and the afternoon light cast long shadows across farmland that now served as a model for sustainable agriculture innovation. Do you ever wonder how things might have been different if we'd been able to work together from the beginning? Elena asked. Marcus considered the question while watching workers harvest apples that would be processed into specialty products and distributed through the collaborative network they'd built together. I think we need to become who we are before we can create what we've created. Maybe some collaborations are only possible after people have proven to themselves that they can succeed independently. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. I used to think that our relationship failed because we wanted different things. Now I think it failed because we weren't yet ready to build something together that honored both of our values and ambitions. As Marcus prepared to return to California, he realized that his journey had brought him full circle in ways he never could have anticipated. He'd left Nebraska seeking success that would vindicate his choice to abandon rural communities and agricultural traditions. Instead, he'd found his most meaningful work in protecting and strengthening exactly the communities and traditions he'd once dismissed. Elena had given him more than professional opportunity and personal closure. She'd shown him that the most profound success emerges not from choosing the right path, but from having the courage to keep growing until you become the person capable of building what the world actually needs. Some stories of love and loss end with reunion and redemption. Others end with something more valuable: the recognition that people can find their way back to what matters most through routes they never expected to travel, guided by wisdom they couldn't have possessed when their journeys began. Over the following year, the collaborative network expanded beyond anyone's initial projections. What had started as a modest experiment involving 50 farms across 3 states grew into a movement that attracted international attention from agricultural policy researchers, environmental sustainability advocates, and technology companies seeking to understand how digital innovation could serve social and environmental goals rather than merely maximizing profits. Marcus found himself traveling extensively, consulting with agricultural operations in diverse climates and economic conditions. Each project taught him something new about the complex relationships between technology, environment, community, and economic sustainability. He worked with rice farmers in Arkansas, developing water conservation systems, vegetable producers in Michigan implementing integrated pest management protocols, and livestock operations in Montana creating regenerative grazing programs. The diversity of agricultural challenges required Marcus to continually expand his technical expertise while deepening his understanding of rural economics and environmental science. Each consulting engagement presented unique cybersecurity requirements that emerged from specific combinations of climate conditions, soil types, crop selections, and market relationships. More importantly, Marcus discovered that agricultural technology work provided opportunities for innovation that exceeded anything he'd encountered in corporate environments. Instead of optimizing existing systems for marginal improvements, he was helping create entirely new approaches to food production, resource management, and rural economic development. The intellectual stimulation was matched by emotional satisfaction that Marcus had never experienced in his previous career. Every security system he designed protected real farmers working real land to feed real communities. Every successful implementation strengthened rural economies and supported environmental sustainability practices that would benefit future generations. Elena's operation continued evolving as well, expanding from sustainable farming into agricultural research, education, and policy development. She established partnerships with major universities, creating research programs that tested innovative approaches to soil health, water conservation, and carbon sequestration. Her farm became a living laboratory where graduate students conducted thesis research on topics ranging from heritage seed preservation to renewable energy, integration in agricultural settings. The educational programs Elena developed attracted visitors from around the world. Agricultural ministers from developing nations toured her facilities to understand how small-scale operations could achieve productivity improvements while maintaining environmental sustainability. Corporate executives from food companies visited to learn about supply chain innovations that could support both local agriculture and global food security. Elena's influence extended into agricultural policy development as well. She testified before congressional committees about rural economic development strategies, advised government agencies on sustainable agriculture incentives, and participated in international conferences about climate change adaptation in agricultural systems. The transformation was remarkable, not just in scale, but in the breadth of Elena's expertise. She'd evolved from a struggling farmer into a recognized authority on agricultural innovation, environmental sustainability, and rural economic development. Her opinions were sought by organizations ranging from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization to the World Bank. Marcus and Elena's professional collaboration deepened as their individual reputations grew. They co-authored research papers about cybersecurity challenges in sustainable agriculture, presented joint keynote addresses at international conferences, and consulted together on large-scale projects that required both technological expertise and agricultural knowledge. Their working relationship became a model for productive collaboration between technology professionals and agricultural practitioners. They demonstrated how mutual respect, complementary expertise, and shared values could create innovations that neither could have achieved independently. The personal dimensions of their renewed relationship remained complex but manageable. They'd both learned to appreciate what they'd built together without romanticizing what they'd lost in their youth. Their friendship was grounded in professional respect and shared commitment to meaningful work rather than nostalgia for possibilities that might have been. Marcus often reflected on the journey that had brought him back to agricultural applications through such an unexpected route. His success in cybersecurity had required leaving rural Nebraska and immersing himself in urban technology culture. But that same success had ultimately enabled him to contribute to rural communities in ways that wouldn't have been possible if he'd never left. The circuitous path had been necessary, Marcus realized, because the agricultural technology field hadn't existed when he was young. The innovations Elena was implementing required expertise that could only be developed through experience in multiple domains: farming, business development, environmental science, and advanced technology applications. Marcus's contribution to Elena's success wasn't just technical expertise, but perspective gained from understanding both agricultural communities and technology development cultures. He could translate between worlds that often misunderstood each other, facilitating collaborations that created value for everyone involved. The network they'd built together eventually included over 300 sustainable farms across 12 states, collectively representing millions of acres under sustainable management and billions of dollars in annual agricultural production. The participating operations shared data, coordinated marketing efforts, negotiated collectively with suppliers, and collaborated on research projects that advanced sustainable agriculture practices. More significantly, the network demonstrated that small and medium-sized agricultural operations could achieve economic advantages typically available only to industrial agriculture companies, while maintaining environmental and social benefits that industrial operations couldn't provide. The success attracted investment from venture capital firms, agricultural companies, and government agencies seeking to scale sustainable agriculture practices. Elena and Marcus found themselves managing an organization that employed dozens of people and influenced agricultural policy decisions at state and federal levels. 5 years after their first professional collaboration, Marcus made the decision to relocate permanently to Nebraska, accepting Elena's offer to become Chief Technology Officer of Carrington Agricultural Innovations. The position would allow him to focus entirely on agricultural technology development while maintaining his consulting relationships with other sustainable agriculture operations. The relocation felt like completing a circle that had taken 20 years to trace. Marcus was returning to the landscape where he'd grown up, but as someone whose expertise and experience allowed him to contribute to rural communities in ways he'd never imagined possible. His farewell party in California was attended by technology executives, environmental advocates, and agricultural researchers who had worked with him on various projects. Several colleagues expressed envy for his opportunity to focus entirely on meaningful work without the compromises required in corporate environments. "You figured out something most of us are still struggling with," one friend told him. "How to use your professional skills in service of goals that actually matter, instead of just optimizing someone else's profit margins." When Marcus arrived at the Carrington farm for his first day as Chief Technology Officer, Elena met him at the entrance with a bottle of champagne and a smile that conveyed both professional excitement and personal satisfaction. "Welcome home," she said, and Marcus realized that she was right. He was finally home, not just geographically, but in the sense of finding work that aligned with his deepest values and contributed to communities he cared about. The years that followed proved that some of the best decisions are those that initially seem like sacrifices, but ultimately provide opportunities for growth and contribution that exceed anything you thought possible when you made them. Marcus had learned that success isn't about choosing the right path from the beginning, but about remaining open to possibilities that emerge as you develop the wisdom and expertise to recognize them. Elena had shown him that meaningful work often requires the courage to build something new rather than optimizing something that already exists. Together, they'd created something that honored both tradition and innovation, proving that the most valuable achievements often emerge from combinations of perspectives that initially seem incompatible. Their story became a testament to the power of persistence, growth, and the willingness to admit when your assumptions about what's possible might need to be reconsidered. The impact of their work extended far beyond individual farms or even regional agricultural networks. Within 3 years of Marcus joining Carrington Agricultural Innovations full-time, their collaborative model was being studied by agricultural economists at Harvard Business School, environmental scientists at Stanford University, and rural development specialists at the USDA. The platform they'd created had become a case study in how technology could strengthen rather than replace traditional agricultural communities. International delegations began arriving regularly at the Carrington farm, seeking to understand how the principles Elena and Marcus had developed could be adapted to different cultural and economic contexts. Agricultural ministers from Kenya, Brazil, and Vietnam spent weeks observing operations and interviewing network participants about the practical challenges of implementing collaborative sustainable agriculture. The diversity of international interest revealed something neither Elena nor Marcus had initially recognized. Their work addressed global challenges that transcended the specific economic and environmental conditions of American agriculture. Food security, climate change adaptation, rural economic development, and sustainable resource management were universal concerns that required innovative solutions at every scale. Dr. Rajesh Patel, an agricultural economist from the International Food Policy Research Institute, spent 6 months embedded with their operation to understand the economic mechanisms that made their collaborative model successful. His resulting publication in the Journal of Agricultural Economics identified key factors that could be replicated in different geographic and cultural contexts. The Carrington model demonstrates that agricultural innovation doesn't require choosing between economic viability and environmental sustainability, Dr. Patel wrote. Instead, it shows how those goals can be mutually reinforcing when farmers have access to appropriate technology, collaborative networks, and markets that reward sustainable practices. The academic attention led to research grants that allowed Elena and Marcus to expand their work in directions neither had originally envisioned. They received funding from the National Science Foundation to study carbon sequestration potential in collaborative, sustainable agriculture networks. The Gates Foundation provided resources to adapt their technology platform for smallholder farmers in developing countries. Most significantly, the European Union invited them to lead a consortium developing sustainable agriculture policies for the post-Brexit agricultural transition in the United Kingdom. The project required Elena and Marcus to work with farmers, technology companies, and government agencies across multiple countries to design systems that could support both local food security and international trade relationships. Marcus found the international work particularly rewarding because it challenged him to develop cybersecurity solutions for agricultural operations in diverse regulatory environments, climate conditions, and technological contexts. Protecting agricultural data in Kenya required different approaches than securing farming operations in Scotland or Vietnam. Each international project taught him something new about the relationship between technology, culture, and agricultural practice. He learned to design security systems that worked with intermittent internet connectivity, protect sensitive information in countries with different privacy laws, and integrate with traditional farming practices that varied dramatically across cultures. The technical challenges were matched by personal growth opportunities that Marcus hadn't expected when he first changed careers. Working in international development required cultural sensitivity, collaborative leadership skills, and the ability to facilitate communication between groups with very different priorities and perspectives. Elena's role evolved as well, from sustainable farming practitioner to global thought leader on agricultural innovation. She was appointed to serve on the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on food security and agriculture, participated in United Nations discussions about sustainable development goals, and advised the World Bank on rural development strategies. The recognition was gratifying, but Elena remained most energized by hands-on work with farmers who were implementing sustainable practices in their own operations. She established mentorship programs that paired experienced sustainable agriculture practitioners with farmers, transitioning from conventional methods. The mentorship network created unexpected relationships that strengthened rural communities in ways that went beyond agricultural production. Experienced organic farmers helped newcomers navigate certification processes and market development challenges. Veteran practitioners shared practical knowledge about crop rotation strategies, integrated pest management, and renewable energy systems. More importantly, the mentorship relationships created social connections that reduced the isolation many farmers experienced when adopting practices that differed from conventional approaches in their regions. The network provided emotional support and practical advice that helped farmers persist through the challenging transition period required to establish sustainable operations markers. And Elena documented these relationship dynamics in a book they co-authored about collaborative models for agricultural innovation. Growing Together: How Farmers and Technologists Can Build Sustainable Food Systems became required reading in agricultural economics programs at major universities and influenced policy discussions about rural development funding priorities. The book's success led to speaking opportunities that took them around the world, presenting their collaborative model to audiences ranging from smallholder farmer cooperatives to multinational agricultural companies. Each presentation required adapting their message to different cultural contexts while maintaining core principles about the importance of farmer-led innovation supported by appropriate technology. Marcus particularly enjoyed presentations to technology conferences, where he could challenge conventional assumptions about the relationship between innovation and disruption. Instead of viewing technology as a tool for replacing traditional practices, he advocated for approaches that enhanced agricultural knowledge, developed over generations of farming experience. The most sophisticated agricultural technology in the world is useless if farmers don't trust it, can't afford it, or can't adapt it to their specific conditions, Marcus would tell audiences of software developers and venture capitalists. Real innovation happens when technologists humble themselves to learn from agricultural practitioners and design tools that serve farmers' goals rather than imposing external priorities. These presentations often generated consulting opportunities, with agricultural technology companies seeking to develop products that would be genuinely useful to farmers rather than just technically impressive. Marcus found himself serving on advisory boards for startups developing everything from soil monitoring systems to agricultural drone applications. The consulting work allowed him to influence technology development at the early stages, ensuring that cybersecurity considerations were integrated into product design rather than added as afterthoughts. More importantly, he could advocate for user interface designs and data management approaches that respected farmers' expertise and decision-making autonomy. Elena's international work led to similar opportunities to influence agricultural policy development in countries seeking to transition toward more sustainable food systems. She testified before parliamentary committees in the United Kingdom about post-Brexit agricultural support programs, advised the European Commission on sustainable agriculture incentives, and participated in United Nations discussions about climate change adaptation strategies. The policy work was often frustrating because it required navigating complex political dynamics and bureaucratic processes that moved slowly compared to on-farm innovation. But Elena learned that sustainable agriculture practices could only achieve large-scale impact if they were supported by appropriate regulatory frameworks and economic incentives. Individual farmers can demonstrate that sustainable practices are technically and economically viable. Elena would explain to policymakers But systemic change requires government policies that reward environmental stewardship and support farmer transitions to sustainable methods. Her policy advocacy was informed by practical experience managing a profitable, sustainable agriculture operation, which gave her credibility with both farmers and government officials. She could speak about soil health improvements, carbon sequestration potential, and biodiversity benefits from the perspective of someone who had achieved those outcomes while maintaining economic viability. The combination of practical experience and policy influence made Elena a uniquely effective advocate for sustainable agriculture. She understood both the challenges farmers faced implementing new practices and the systemic barriers that prevented wider adoption of methods proven to be environmentally and economically beneficial. As their work gained international recognition, Marcus and Elena found themselves managing an organization with offices in 4 countries and partnerships with agricultural operations on every continent. The administrative responsibilities were demanding, but they remained committed to maintaining direct involvement in on-farm innovation and farmer education programs. They established a leadership development program that trained sustainable agriculture practitioners to become regional coordinators for their expanding network. The program provided business training, technical education, and communication skills development that enabled experienced farmers to support others interested in transitioning to sustainable practices. The Leadership Development Initiative created career advancement opportunities within sustainable agriculture, addressing brain drain problems that had historically limited rural economic development. Young people with agricultural backgrounds could now envision professional futures that combined their knowledge of farming with interests in business development, environmental science, or technology applications. Marcus was particularly proud of the cybersecurity training component he'd developed for the leadership program. Participants learned to assess digital security risks, implement data protection protocols, and educate other farmers about protecting sensitive agricultural information from cyber threats. The training was necessary because agricultural operations were becoming increasingly dependent on digital systems that created new vulnerabilities alongside improved efficiency. Farmers needed to understand how to protect financial records, crop production data, and customer information while taking advantage of technological tools that could improve their operations. 10 years after their first professional collaboration, Marcus and Elena had built something neither had imagined possible when they were young. Their work influenced agricultural policy in dozens of countries, supported thousands of farmers transitioning to sustainable practices, and demonstrated that environmental stewardship and economic prosperity could be mutually reinforcing rather than competing priorities. The personal journey had been equally remarkable. 2 people who had once been unable to reconcile different visions of success had learned to create something together that honored both of their values while achieving impact neither could have accomplished independently. Their relationship remained professional and platonic, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to meaningful work rather than romantic attachment. They'd both grown into people who could collaborate effectively while maintaining appropriate boundaries and pursuing independent personal lives. Elena had married James Mitchell, her former employee who had developed the mushroom cultivation enterprise on her farm. Their relationship was built on shared values about sustainable agriculture and complementary skills that strengthened both their personal partnership and their professional collaboration. Marcus remained single by choice, finding fulfillment in work that aligned with his values and friendships with colleagues who shared his interests in agricultural innovation and environmental sustainability. He'd learned that meaningful work and strong professional relationships could provide the sense of purpose and community he'd once sought through romantic partnerships. As they reflected on their journey during the 10th anniversary celebration of their collaborative network, Both Elena and Marcus recognized that their story had become something larger than their individual achievements. They demonstrated that people could find their way back to what matters most, through paths they never expected to travel. Guided by wisdom developed through experience rather than predetermined from the beginning, their success proved that the most profound accomplishments often emerge from willingness to admit when your assumptions might be wrong, courage to pursue possibilities that seem uncertain, and persistence to keep learning and growing even when the outcomes remain unclear. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.